Hello and welcome to Lecture 18 of Introduction to Computational Literary Analysis. Today we're going to talk about sentiment analysis and macro-etymological analysis, among other things. Here we go. All right, so I've opened up a new notebook, and today I want to show you a few things that are fun to play around with, even though science behind them is still a little bit new, if that makes sense. So these are things that I typically save for the end of the course for those reasons. So the first one is sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis is, just an attempt to derive from a text whether it is a positive feeling or a negative feeling. So we're trying to extract sentiment from a text, usually in terms of polarity. So positive polarity usually means good sentiment. So it means things like approval, so you can imagine if you're reading a movie review, and the movie review said lots of really great things about the movie. It said, it's a great movie, you should go and see it, it's the best fun I've had at the movie theater in ages. This would be a good sentiment. Negative polarity, it's bad sentiment, this is usually disapproval. Like, this movie is terrible, don't go see this movie. So this works really well for reviews. It does not work so well for literature. But there's some famous examples of applying sentiment analysis to literary works in an attempt to sort of get an idea of the arc of a plot. Sometimes these are successful and sometimes not so much, but they're always controversial in some way. So, I present this to you with a lot of hesitation to say, one, don't take these results too seriously, and two, really make sure you know what's happening in the background. So there's several libraries for sentiment analysis. They're usually in one of two categories. They're either lexical, and so lexical means it uses a dictionary. And that means when it encounters words like fabulous, it will say, okay, this is a +2. Or, when it encounters a word like terrible, it'll say this is a -2. And so you can imagine this has some difficulties, because what if you have an expression like not terrible? Well, some sentiment analysis will score this still as -2, even though really what it is more like 0 or 0.5. So there's something that can adjust for this, and it's called negation propagation. So some libraries have okay negation propagation and some don't. And it usually has to do with the the kind of source text that it's created to work with. And they're almost never created for literary text. And so you have to keep in mind that if a library is created for use in social media, it's going to behave a little bit differently for a literary text. There are also these machine learning approaches, and what they do is, if you have a large enough corpus of sentiments and the words that describe those sentiments, then you can train a model to recognize when it's seeing certain sentiments and to predict those in some cases. And these perform sometimes a little bit better than the lexical approach, but not by much. So I'm going to say this performs slightly better than lexical approach. Okay, so one of the lexical libraries is called Vader. And Vader has, it's lexical. It also has some negation propagation. So, yeah, you may know that, in English, in slang, sometimes if something is a bomb, that's usually pretty bad. But if something is the bomb, sometimes that can be a good thing. So Vader tries to deal with a lot of these quirks of the English language, but again, it's very much dealing with 21st century language that you might see on social media. But so Vader has been integrated into the NLTK, and so if we look at this, I think it's from the NLTK sentiment module, we can import Vader, I believe. Is there anything else in the sentiment module? Let's see. Sentiment analyzer. Okay, yeah, so these are all part of Vader, really. So one of these is sentiment intensity analyzer. So actually, we can just import that directly. Yeah, and the first thing we're going to want to do is to initialize this. So this one, so this one is not Vader because this is based on some machine learning approaches. So this is not the one that we're looking for. Okay, yeah. So the one that we're looking for is sentiment intensity analyzer. So I've changed this here to sentiment intensity analyzer. And if we look at the documentation here, it says it uses a lexicon, and it will try to look for that lexicon. So yeah, again, it looks like it needs some data, and we have not downloaded that data yet. So here I'm going to download it using the NLTK downloader. Now I can run this again. I should put this in the right order in case I ever run this notebook. Now let's see what I can do with the sentiment analyzer object. I can get polarity scores. This is the one that we want. It says here it returns a floating point number for sentiment strength based on the input text. And it takes a text as input. So that was really, really terrible, and I hated it. So I imagine this sentence should be scored really negatively. Okay, so it gives us a lot of stuff here. So it's it's quantifying negative values, neutral values, and positive values, and it's creating this compound or composite calculation for the entire text, and it's saying that this has a very negative valence. So we could get that if we wanted to, just by indexing it with compound. Okay, and we can even write a little function to do that for us. We could say get sentiment for a given text is, we're going to return sentiment analyzer and get polarity scores for that text, and then we're going to get compound value. Okay, so why don't we run this on a larger text? Okay, so let's pull up Dubliners, shall we? So we have, it's in readings, content, texts, Dubliners. And I can extract some stories from it too. I can call this Dubliners stories. And then I'm going to get that by splitting on \n and 2 pound signs. And then let's peek at the first 200 characters of each one. Yeah, so Sisters in Encounter, Araby, Eveline, after the race. Yeah, so why don't we look at 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is Eveline. So this is fresh in our mind. We know that this is a bit of an emotional roller coaster, Eveline. So let's see if that's reflected in the sentiment analysis. So what kinds of ways can we break this up? So we could break it up by paragraph if we wanted. That seems like a nice way to chop this up. So we could say Eveline paragraphs is Eveline, but we're going to split it on \n, which is the thing that happens here that we can't see, but it's 2 line breaks. So how many of those do we have? 27 paragraphs, that makes sense. And it looks like this. Okay, so now I can get the sentiment score for each of these paragraphs. And it does that fairly quickly, and I have 27 of them. So yeah, why don't I put this into a pandas series so that I can plot it? And of course I have to remember that I have to import pandas. Okay, yeah, it's all over the place. So it's mostly, yeah, this is one heck of a roller coaster here. Yeah, I wonder if we couldn't do some smoothing with this. Yeah, so maybe instead of paragraphs, maybe let's do sentences and see how it works for that instead. So I'll use our NLTK sentence tokenizer to get all of the sentences from Eveline. I'm going to call this Evelyn's sense. Only, yeah, I'm going to do this down here so that I don't mess up what I've already done. Okay, so this is the sentences. And now if we write another list comprehension to go through each of these sentences, we have quite a few more sentences. And we can wrap this in a pandas series and plot it. Okay, yeah, so this is kind of all over the place. So Evelyn sentiments is this whole thing, and maybe I could leave off the plotting for now. So one thing that I can do is I can take the rolling average of these to get a little bit of smoothing. So this method rolling, it takes something like a pandas series, and then I can give it like a window. I could say, you know, a window of every 5 sentences. Take the mean of those 5 sentences and keep on going. And of course it doesn't have anything until you get to the 5th one because it's a rolling average. And now if we plot this, you can see we're smoothing it out a little bit. What if we look at the first 10? What if we look at 20 sentences? Okay, yeah, so we are already starting to get something kind of interpretable. I know this moment in Evelyn, you know, because this is the one where Evelyn is sort of paralyzed and holding on to that railing for dear life, you know, and Frank is shouting, "Evelyn, Evie, come here," and she's saying, "No, no, no," or at least thinking, "No, no, no." And you know, and at some point she's reminiscing. I'm pretty sure it's around here, but we can check. Yeah, what is around, say, like sentence 63? He had tales of distant countries. So why don't we look at like 63 to 75. You know, because we would sort of expect this to be positive sentiments. Yeah, so these are sentences, but yeah, maybe we can take these sentences and replace all of those line breaks with spaces. Yeah, and while we're at it, you know, we can zip this together with the sentiments. You know, so I can zip those together. And I'm going to have to get like 63 to 75 on that one too. Sentiment and sentence both start with sent. So yeah, we might have to do it this way. He had Tales of Distant Countries, it thinks is neutral. He had started as a deck boy, also neutral. Negative, he had sailed through the Straits of Magellan and he had told her stories of the terrible Patagonians. So, stories of the terrible Patagonians. So the word terrible is giving this a negative sentiment. He had fallen on his feet in Buenos Aires and come to the old country just for a holiday. Probably holiday is the one that is giving this a positive sentiment. Her father had forbidden her to have anything to say to them. This is negative. One day he had quarreled with Frank, and after that she had to meet her lover secretly. So it's picking up here, I think, on lover, and it's saying that this is a super positive sentiment. The evening deepened in the avenue. Okay, neutral, neutral. Ernest had been her favorite, but she liked Harry too. So is this area really so positive in sentiment? I mean, we're getting some positive words. What if we were to look all the way up to 80? Yeah, so all of these are kind of like, these are fond memories. You could say that these are positive sentiments. Sometimes he could be very nice. Okay, relatively positive sentiments. Let's look at what happens here at 120. So it's about like 122, but let's look at everything from 120 on. No, it was impossible. So yeah, these are negative. Her hands clutched the iron in frenzy. So yeah, frenzy is kind of negative. Clutch is kind of negative, I think. Amid the seas, she sent a cry of anguish. So anguish is definitely very negative. Is rushing negative? I mean, sometimes these are not great. Her eyes gave him no sign of love or farewell or recognition. So because love is here, it's scoring this super high, right? But no sign of love is not something that the negation propagation is handling right now. So I would say this is certainly like a failure there. So, you do have to be very careful with stuff like this, because you do have to make sure that you know what it's doing to calculate this, and not just accept these results as obviously handed down to us from a wise computer of some sort, because it might do an okay job at showing us roughly what the sentiment is looking like, but I don't know how much I trust this one. All right, so yeah, why don't we try the other one? So that's sentiment intensity analyzer, but why don't we try importing sentiment analyzer and just see what this does? So this says that it's a sentiment analysis tool based on machine learning approaches. It asks us to give it a classifier. Yeah, let's see what we can do with it. Yeah, so it looks like we would first have to train this. And it looks like we would need to give it a training set first of data that we previously labeled as, as positive or negative sentiment. So, yeah, I don't think we'll be doing this right now. There are lots of other libraries that you can use. Another one is called TextBlob, and this is sort of like an NLTK Lite that has sentiment analysis built in. And there are lots of other ways that you could sort of approximate this type of analysis. People get really excited about sentiment analysis often when you first hear about it because it sounds like something magical. But what it's doing is, I can't emphasize this enough, often really dumb. Just looking for certain words and guessing the sentiment based on those words. So we have to treat this with a great amount of skepticism. Okay, so speaking of things that we should treat with skepticism, I'll show you a completely different analysis technique that I invented called macro-etymological analysis. All right, so this is a type of text analysis that is designed to look into the histories of words. And the histories of the words will tell us a little bit about the valence of that word, whether it's formal or informal, whether it's highfalutin sounding or not, or whether it's more likely to be an official document or any number of things. So one of the examples that I'm fond of giving is, English has a lot of these kind of triple synonym triplets, and there are quite a few of them. One of them is kingly and royal and regal. So kingly, this one comes from Germanic, because king is a Germanic word. Royal, this one comes from French, so that's that has those valences. And this one, regal, this one comes from Latin. So when you think about these words, kingly, royal, and regal, I don't know about you, but I typically will think that kingly feels much more informal than royal, and regal feels the most formal of them all. And this has to do with the history of the acquisition of words from these languages into English, right? So this is something that you can get out of a book of the history of the English language, but it's it's a fascinating story, and the English language sort of begins with Germanic roots, and then after the conquest of England in 1066 by the Normans, French becomes an official language, and it becomes a language of law. And it becomes a language of lots of kind of official context and the aristocracy, So often when we have words that mean roughly the same thing, but they have a different feeling to them, it's usually the one that comes from French that gives us a feeling that it's something that we would use in an official context, right? So medical words or medical terms are often from French or Latin. And so this is why we don't go into the doctor and we say, I hurt my funny bone and I have like a giant boo-boo or something, and the doctor certainly wouldn't say anything like that either, because a lot of the doctor's authority is knowing the Latin terms for something. So this means that if we see a term of Latin origin or a term of French origin, we're probably seeing an aspect of that text that is, is somewhat Latinate, is somewhat French is possibly somewhat formal. And these are all interesting and useful aspects of the text that we could then use to analyze in certain ways. So let's try it out. So I'm going to just do a GitHub search for my own repository, Macro-Etym. And this gives you instructions for how to install this on your own computer. So they're not super easy instructions, really. One is I clone the repository, and then I do this pip install command where I install the local version of that repository. So I'm going to do that cooking show thing again. Okay, I've run all of the commands I've needed to run to install it on the command line, and now I can check that I have everything installed. Import Macro-Etym. Is that going to work? No, yeah, because this means I just installed it. So to get this to work, I should save my work. I should stop the kernel and restart it. Actually, yeah, I'm going to start. Yeah, I'm going to start a new one. Okay, my setup is a little unusual here. So yeah, what I've done is I've cloned the Git repository inside my notes directory, and then I'm CDing into that notes directory so that I can import the module locally. So I've done import Macro-Etym, but this might be different on your system because maybe pip works slightly differently. Pip wasn't working for me today, but so I'm importing this locally. But again, yeah, let's see what's in here. Let's maybe run the dir function. Yeah, what is in there? All right, I had to sort of familiarize myself with my own software. So yeah, it looks like it's in macroetym.main, and then there's an object called text. Maybe I have to import this in a certain way. No module named Pi country, huh? Yeah, so my setup didn't. Yeah, okay, so I've done this in a bit of a hacky way. So I've imported the module locally. You can import any Python file you have in your local directory, by just importing that name. But this is going to be, of course, very different for you if you run this because you will have installed it through pip, which isn't working for me for some reason. But if you have any difficulty installing this, please let me know and we can work through it together. But either way, you should have been able to import this text object. So this text object, these are the parameters it takes. We are going to keep the language English, so we don't have to change that. We are going to ignore prefixes and suffixes, and we're going to ignore the current language. But I have to give it a text first. So why don't I open Dubliners. And I'll break it into stories. Yeah, so why don't I look at the aggregate macro-etymologies of all of these Dubliner stories? Yeah, so how about Evelyn first? Evelyn is number 4. Let me just double check that that's the case. Yeah, so if I take the text object and I feed it Evelyn, this will give me a macro-etymological text object back. And what kinds of things can I do with this? Let's look around. It's computing a whole lot of stuff. Let's maybe stop it. Okay, so the thing that we want here is, I think, stats and pretty stats. Because we want statistics about its macro-etymology. So in other words, how many words of French origin does it have? How many words of Latin origin does it have? And so on. And so to do this, it should take quite a long time, because what it's doing is looking up each word in an etymological dictionary. Great. So it returns a lot of statistics, but yeah, unless you're already familiar with them, this is the 3-letter international language code. So this is like Old Norse, this is Latin, this is Old French, this is Middle French. So why don't we look at this in a different way by looking at the pretty stats. Great. So this says it's 61% Old English, 12% Old French, 6% Latin, 6% Anglo-Norman. So it's found the origin languages of all of the words in the text. So that's for Evelyn. What if we were to do that for sisters, or... Yeah, let's do sisters. So we know sisters is Dubliner Stories 1. So we can make that into a text object. And then let's get the pretty stats from that. Great, so Evelyn has a higher proportion of Old English words of Old English origin. Sisters has a higher proportion of Latin words. And if we wanted to, we could put this in a dictionary again. We could call this sisters Evelyn is Yeah, and why don't we get another one too? Yeah, what would be another good one to get? Yeah, Araby. So yeah, which one is Araby? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So we can put that into a text object here, and then we can just do pretty stats on that. Yeah, so now we have this etymological data structure. You can just make it look a little bit prettier. Now that should take quite a long time to compute because it's computing all of this stuff again. Great, and now it's done. And now what if we load this into a pandas data frame? Of course I have to remember to first import the pandas data frame. Great, yeah, so Sisters has the most Old English here. No, Old French. Eveline is the most Germanic. And Sisters is the most Latinate. See, I would sort of ascribe this to the fact that the Sisters has a lot to do with the clergy, you know. So clergy traditionally uses a whole lot of Latinate words, you know, because Latin was for such a long time the language, even in Joyce's time, you know, the official language of the Catholic Church. You know, so words like ecclesiastical and liturgical and all kinds of other religious words are of Latinate origin. So this would kind of not surprise me there. So there's some arguments that you can make by interpreting the results of this etymological analysis. And, you know, if we wanted to, we could also, instead of getting pretty stats out of it, yeah, let me instead do this. Yeah, I think it's parent stats. Yeah, I'm going to have to get a directory of this. Yeah, what we want to do is, yeah, I think this is it, family stats. So one of the things that this macro-etymological analyzer will allow you to do is get language families. So Latinate will collapse all of the words of Old French origin, all of the words of Latin origin, Italian, Spanish, and Germanic will do the same thing with, say, like Old Norse and Old English. Semitic is Hebrew, Hellenic is mostly ancient Greek, you know, and then you have a dozen or so other language families. And so this can give us often more meaningful information, although less granular in a way. So that is macro-etymological analysis in a nutshell. Let me just show you what this looks like on the Brown corpus. Okay, so I'm going to load this from Project Gutenberg corpus. Wait, yeah, from nltk.corpus import brown. So brown will give us file IDs, and it will give us raw text, but I believe the raw text is POS tagged. So I think we need to get the words. Right, from brown. And yeah, let's make one big list of all of the words. One big dictionary. So for each file ID, we're going to get the file ID and the words for file ID in brown file IDs. No, it's brown categories. And these words we'll get by doing brown words, and then it's categories equals cat, and then we'll say for cat in brown categories. Great. And yeah, so this should get us a dictionary. In the dictionary, if I pull up this contextual help, yeah, is a dictionary where the key is the category and the value is just like a list of those words. All right. So yeah, now we have the brown corpus in a manageable form. And we want to run the macro-etymological analyzer over this. Well, the text object, by default, it does the work of tokenization. So we should kind of detokenize this. And when we detokenize it, we might as well do some other things to it too. So I can write a function to do that. So it takes a word list and it just joins together those words. But first, maybe it can remove the punctuation. So a list comprehension to remove the punctuation, join together the words, and oops, I can just have it return that. Uh-oh. Press the wrong button. Oh, well, I lost a little bit of work there. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to join these together. So remove some of the punctuation, and then I'm going to join together the words, and now I can make a new one called brown texts, and that's just going to be yeah, this was supposed to be cat for category. And then I'm going to go through all of the items, split them up in cat and words, and then detokenize them. So this should give me a new dictionary with all of those texts. And then, yeah, I can write another one of these. That takes that text, puts it into a text object, and gets what kind of statistics does it get? Family stats. So yeah, let's get family stats from that text, for each category in text in brown texts items. That was unusually fast. Something must be wrong. Aha. Yeah, I just did not call the function. Yeah, now this should take quite a long time, I believe, but I can put this into a data frame when I'm done with it, and then I can plot it as a bar chart. Right now it's doing a lot of computations to compute all of the etymologies and their proportions of apparent etymologies as well. I'll get back to you when this is finished. Okay. Yeah, that took about 3 minutes. It took a pretty long time. So this is kind of what I want, but I think I just need to transpose this to get it to display in kind of the way that I want, which is, yeah, by category. Okay, yeah, so this is pretty much, yeah, showing me what I expect. Why don't I look at only one of these at a time? Okay, so if we look at Germanic, you can see that adventure novels and romance novels and also fiction and mystery are the highest in Germanic. And this is because, in adventure novels, you don't have a whole lot of words of Latinate origin in them. People are not going to want to use, say, like the medical terms for things in an adventure novel. You're not going to hear people that aren't doctors say masticate instead of chew, or expectorate instead of spit or something. Let's look at Latinate. So with Latinate, it's government documents and learned documents that are the highest. And we also have high scores in news and religion and reviews. So yeah, what does it mean that these genres have these kind of etymological valences? Well, it means given a fictional text X, that fictional text might have parts that feel like a government document or like a learned document. So like Moby Dick, for example, is probably going to score very high on the Latinate words compared to most fiction. And then if fiction has a high Germanic and a low Latinate percentage, that probably means that it's going to be more in the adventure or the romance genre